we have just a couple questions on the review that are asking us to find amplitude, period, and vertical shift. So let's go ahead and do them in this video. The first one is asking us to do them for this function. F of x is 4 times the sine of 4x. To find our amplitude, we're looking for our a value. Remember, the standard form of an equation is a times the sine of bx plus c. So a is going to be the amplitude, and it is created by the number in front of our trig function. So our amplitude is the number 4. Easy to find. To find b, which is going to contribute to our period, to find our period, we always have to do 2 pi divided by whatever our b value is. And this time the b value is 4. So 2 pi divided by 4. And if I simplify this fraction, 2 over 4 reduces. This is just pi over 2. Last but not least, we're looking for the vertical shift. And in this case, the vertical shift is the number being added or subtracted at the end. And we don't have one of those, so we have none. And that one's all done. Let's find the amplitude, period, and vertical shift for this guy. The amplitude, again, is given by the value in front of our trig function. So the amplitude is 1/2. The period is given by 2 pi divided by the number in with x. And we don't have 1, so it's an invisible 1, which means our period is just 2 pi. And for our vertical shift, we're looking for any number being added or subtracted afterward. We have a -5, so we're going down 5 spaces. All done. Now let's take a look at what's next. We have to determine the amplitude, period, and vertical shift for this guy. Now the amplitude is the distance from this function's midline. So the very first thing I have to do for this function is find its midline. The midline is like the halfway point. So my function is 4 units tall. Because my function's 4 units tall, the midpoint is going to be right here on my function. And if that's the midpoint, then the height from the midpoint is just 2 units. So the amplitude is 2 units. The period is the measurement from when my function starts to where it starts to repeat itself. So my function begins right here, it's going uphill, and it's at the value y equals 1. So I want to trace this function. Let me go ahead and trace this guy until I find the next point where it's not downhill, but uphill at y equals 1, which is right here. So this is the next point where it does that. And if you notice, this section is exactly the same. Ooh, grab the wrong thing. Can I grab the green? There we go. As this section. It absolutely perfectly repeats itself, and that's the exact same thing that would happen over here. It just keeps repeating. So this is the first section, the first period before it starts to repeat itself. So all we have to do is find out how long that took. So it starts right over here at 0. Stop dragging, please. Thank you. It starts over here at 0, and it keeps going all the way up until this value, which is 5, 6, 7, 8. So the period is 8. It's 8 units long before it starts to repeat itself. Last but not least is the vertical shift. Vertical shift is how far its midline has been moved, either up or down, away from where it usually is. And the midline for sine and cosine is usually at 0. This midline has been moved up 1 space. So our vertical shift is up 1. All right, let's take a look at question 14. Very similar question. So amplitude, period, and vertical shift. Let's start with the amplitude again. To find the amplitude, I have to find how far it is from its midline. So I have to find its midline. So we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units tall, which means the midline is going to be right here. And the distance we've moved from the midline is a height of 3 units. But if you'll notice, this curve looks like the cosine function, as opposed to the sine function. So it looks more like cosine, except that cosine usually starts way up high and then goes down low. This function starting down low and then going up high. This function has been flipped upside down, which means the amplitude is negative. Good catch to find. To find the period, we're going to go ahead and trace it until it starts to repeat itself. We start down here at -5. So I'm going to trace the function until I end up down low at -5, which happens again right over here, which makes the period 10 pi. And last but not least, we have to find the vertical shift. The midline has been moved down 2 spaces, so our vertical shift is down 2. Our midline is usually right at 0, and this one's been shifted down. All right. In the last video, we will take a look at graphing some of these functions based on their equations.